Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Tēnā koutou katoa, nā mai haere mai. Welcome to our first kōrero for Eco Church for 2023. It's fantastic to have you all with us. Ko Sonia Groes-Petrie toko ingoa. I'm Sonia Groes-Petrie. I'm the Eco Church Community Coordinator for A Rocha Aotearoa at the moment, and I'm so pleased to see so many of you here this evening. It's really wonderful to have such a lovely bunch of people in front of me here tonight. So this evening I'll shortly start us off in prayer, and then I'll do a little bit of an introduction to the 360 carbon calculator so you can get to know it a little bit better, why we've put it together, what it does and how you can access it. We'll then open it up for a bit of time for Q&A, so questions. So initially you can pop your questions in the chat if you like as I'm going through the presentation. We'll also open it up for questions once I finish that presentation, so that will be in about 15-20 minutes time. And then once we've gone through that, we'll have a little bit of a chance to talk together. So we'll have some breakout groups and we'll have a little bit of a talk about what kind of initiatives we might want to see in this space, what kind of carbon reduction activities we could do as communities and communities together. And then we'll wrap it up by 8:30. If you wish to stay on and have a little bit more of an informal chat about anything that we've talked about tonight, then we can do that after that time. But if you can only stay for the hour, that's completely fine, and we'll look at trying to wrap up by 8:30. Right, so before we start, let's just gather together in prayer. I've got a prayer from Pope Francis from Laudato Si. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace us with your tenderness, all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, so that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen. So the initial part of this kōrero tonight is to take you through the 360 carbon calculator. So I will take you through that. We'll talk a little bit about why calculate a carbon footprint for your church, why we're using Climate Stewards 360 carbon calculator, and then go through each of the parts of the calculator, what kind of data or information you might need, and then what you can use the results for. We'll talk a little bit as well about emission reduction plans and offsetting, and then I'll open it up for questions, and then we'll go into breakout groups after that. So the first question could be, why should we calculate our church's carbon footprint? And one thing that reminded me last week was when the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released their latest synthesis report. There was a quote from the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, which said basically that our world needs climate action on all fronts now. So that's everywhere, everything, all at once. And it reminded me that it's at all levels, at households, at personal levels, at communities, at the national and international level that we need to be looking at how we address climate change. And so one part as a church community is that we can look at calculating our carbon footprint to give us an idea of what our starting point is for emissions reductions. It can help provide insights for us into our church's biggest emission sources and therefore where we might want to make some action. It can help foster a sense of working together as a community. And it gives us the ability to track over time how we're doing and to celebrate progress, which is a really important part of this. And why in particular 360 carbon when there are so many different carbon calculators already out there? So many of the calculators that are out there are often either geared towards individuals or businesses, more corporate organisations, not necessarily always relevant or have all of the elements that a church community may want to measure their emissions of. So we've worked with Climate Stewards, who are part of the A Rocha international family, who are based in the UK, and they have been developing carbon calculators for churches and synagogues, for small charities and non-profit organisations since 2020. They've had calculators available for use in the UK, expanded to the US and the Netherlands, and New Zealand is now the 4th country they've been working with. So the calculator itself has been tailored for church use, and we've adapted it using New Zealand emission factors for use with churches in Aotearoa. So some of the specific elements we've incorporated into this has been a section on food. So knowing that within churches, hospitality is often a big part of what we do, we've included a section there on emissions related to food and food consumption. We have included a section on working from home. So we know now that some staff and volunteers for churches work from home part of the week or sometimes all of the week, depending on the circumstances. And there's also been a section added around expenditure. So this is things like if a church wants to see a fuller picture of its emission profile, we can be looking at what we call downstream emissions or sources from purchasing. So things like it could be cleaning products, it might be maintenance, it could be insurance, it could be church flowers, all sorts of things that potentially have a carbon impact are also included in this calculator. The one thing I quite like about the 360 carbon calculator is it allows you to calculate particular sections or sources. So you can decide to just focus on one particular area. It might just be energy where you have the data for, or you're really interested in the food section, and you can just calculate the emissions from that particular area without having to calculate all the other areas to get your result. And it also allows you to put all of your calculations together in the one place. At the moment, I haven't seen any other calculator that incorporates all of these different elements in the one. So you'd probably, if you were using other carbon calculators out there, you might need to use 2 or 3 to get all of the different sources together. So what does it look like? Tonight I'm not going to take you through in detail how to register or set up an organisation. We will in future workshops and wānanga have a chance to go into more detail on some of this type of stuff, but tonight we're just going to have use an example church and take you through how a footprint has been calculated for that. So from my view and my account under 360 at the moment, we've got a few different organisations. Tonight I'm going to be using my test church here in Wellington to show you what the footprint could look like. So for this church here, you can use the little green button that says start a new footprint, and it will take you to how you can set that up. So normally you would name it as something, and then you can set the year, the reporting year that you wish to report under, we suggest that you align your carbon footprinting with your financial reporting year. So if your church reports on a calendar year, you can start it like this, beginning of January. It may be, though, that your church has a reporting year of April to March or July to June, so you can adjust it to, and it will calculate it based on those dates. The other thing just to note here, there are some guidelines, some guidance and help for you as you work through the calculator. So the user guide here gives you details for each of the sections as we go through. If you want to know more details about how things have been calculated or things have been set up. There's often little information sections at the beginning to give you an idea of what you're doing on the page that you're on. And then we'll also see as we go through, there's some little green question marks that help you with some particular information that you may need to know for that particular section. So one of the things to consider when you calculate your footprint is what your boundary is going to be. So whether you're going to include your church congregation only, or whether you want to also include the activities of the users of your facilities. Are you going to do travel and food consumption for users of your facilities, or do you want to just start with your church congregation where it might be easier to obtain that information? If you've got several buildings, you may wish to consider whether you'll be wanting to report emissions from each of those buildings or just the ones that you have control over. So potentially if you're leasing some buildings to others, you may wish to leave that out of your footprint. For travel, consider whether you want to include just your staff or whether you would look at staff and members of your congregation. And then have a think about whether you want this carbon footprint initially to be covering all of the sources, or whether you maybe just start with a subset, and that might depend on whether you've got the resources available or whether you've got the data available for you to record everything, or whether you just start with some individual sources. So the first page you come across in 360 Carbon has a lot of words on it. Don't get scared of this. Don't get off put by it. This is about your church. This has a whole lot of questions about the number of people, the number of services you hold, how many hours your building's occupied for. The purpose of this page really is to enable your emissions to be reported on a per person or a per hour that your church is occupied basis. So if you don't have all of this information, it is not critical to reporting your carbon footprint. So don't worry too much about it. It's there for completeness, but it's not essential for an actual carbon footprint number. One part I would say that is quite helpful is the notes section down here at the bottom. Whoops, I'm just going back there. And that there can allow you to report what your emissions boundary is, or if there are any other elements you want to remember how you've calculated this footprint for. So this part gets put into the PDF report, summary report at the end. So it can be quite helpful if you are going to be reporting your carbon footprint to your leadership team, for example. If you know that you've only included the staff or the staff travel, or you've decided to include flights just for your staff rather than congregation members, whatever it is that you decide that would be useful to know, this can be recorded here and then comes up in the report at the end. So the emission sources that 360 Carbon cover are energy, working from home, both ground and air travel, expenditure, food and drink, and waste, and then water use. So the first page you come across in terms of emission sources are energy. So it has a little introductory section up here for you about what we're looking for in terms of energy usage for your buildings. And it's looking for you to enter the energy usage for the year, for the year that you're measuring. So in some cases, your electricity or your gas provider will have a number on the invoice of how much electricity has been used for the past 12 months. Otherwise, you may need to have and sum up individual 12 months invoices for your electricity usage or your natural gas usage. If you have solar panels and you're using solar panels in your buildings, there's a checkbox here, and if that is clicked, that will come up with how much solar energy you're generating and then also exporting back to the grid, so that can be entered in here and also taken into account at the final calculations. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail at the moment about this location versus market-based energy, but if people are interested in that particularly, we can have a chat about that during the question time or at the end. These are the little question mark bubbles I was mentioning before, that if you hover over those, they will tell you a little bit about a little bit extra information about what is required for these entries here. So working from home, this is based on an emission factor from the Ministry for the Environment here in New Zealand. So this requires you to enter in the number of staff that you have, and then working from home, and then how many hours they work each day from home, how many days a week, and then how many weeks per year. So at the moment, this is entering in default numbers. If they vary for you, you can change those there. The main thing here is if your staff are changing their working from home habits each week, just try and enter a number that's most representative of what's going on an average during an average month. So for travel, this first page is the ground travel. So this would be like staff going to and from church and congregation members to and from church for Sunday services and other events during the week. So the calculator allows you to distinguish between staff and congregation. So this tab I'm showing here in the screenshot is just for staff. And it is asking you for the amount of travel done for the month, for a typical month. And it's broken down into the different types of vehicles, so diesel or petrol cars, hybrid cars, electric cars, and then also your public transport, so bus and train. There's also the space there to put bicycle or foot. That doesn't come up with emissions, but it's sometimes useful for you to know how people are travelling to and from church. So the staff and congregation tabs are similar. They look the same, but it's split it out so that you can, if you wish to, just want to start with staff travel, you can do that. So for flights, here you can enter in flights taken by church members on church business. So maybe staff members, or it may be members perhaps of your parish council or your church leadership team who have gone to events in the country, throughout the country. So here it allows you to enter in airports throughout the world. So you can enter in where you're leaving from and where you're going to. You can enter in whether it's a return journey or just a one-way journey. Then the number of people and the dates that the flights were taken. It will then calculate that out for the year. So you can add in, I've just entered here one flight, but you can add in up to 20 flights on this page. Expenditure. So here, this page here is really to give a church a more complete picture, I guess, of their carbon footprints. But we also acknowledge that this can be, it's when you've got your church accounts, there can be a lot of different categories here. As you can see on the left-hand side, we've set up a whole lot of different categories for which church spending may be happening. It won't be an exclusive list. I know I've probably missed some things. So if there are some purchasing services and goods that you do within your church that aren't in that list, please do let me know, and we can try and see where we can fit it in. What we've done is we've tried to align different church activities with the Statistics New Zealand industry codes, which is where these emission factors come from. So Think Step New Zealand has done some work on looking at expenditure and potential emission factors. So in some cases, the emission factors won't be exactly right. So just be aware that this page there'll be a number of assumptions underlying these emission factors, but it does give you a little bit of an idea of some of the other emissions that can come from spending that happens within a church community. Food. So on the food page, we have it broken into 2 sections. So in the first half up here, we've got drinks and snacks, and we are basing this on the idea of a typical weekly morning tea or an afternoon tea or a supper. And again, here we're looking at your best estimates. We know it won't be an exact science here. Sort of on a typical week, how many things like cups of tea and coffee are served, litres of milk that are used, packets of biscuits, so that you can get a little bit of an idea of what their carbon impact is. On the bottom half of the page here, we have a place for you to enter information around shared meals that might happen within your church community. And the way that we've tried to do this is basing it on the number of people that attend, and then trying to get an estimate of typically what kind of percentages or proportions of different food types might be served at those meals. We know that this is not going to be necessarily really obvious and easy to work out. It might be that you need to do a couple of surveys over a couple of months to get a little bit of an understanding of what types of foods are being offered. If you've got potluck lunches, for example, this is our way of trying to estimate some of the impact of different food types. And again, we've got information from the University of Otago. It's not all exact science here, so it'll be around trying to get an understanding of the impact of meat versus vegetarian type of meals or foods on offer, for example. So the last page of emission sources are waste and water use. So for waste, we have both recycling, composting, and general waste that you can enter in here. This is for a typical month. So for recycling, we have options of wheelie bin sizes, which are then converted to kilograms using an average conversion factor. Or if you do know the kilograms, like the weight of waste that's been put out of recycling or waste that's been put out each week, you can enter it in as kilograms if you know that. So in this case, we've got 4 80-litre wheelie bins going out in a typical month and 4 240-litre wheelie bins going out for general waste. If you had food that you were composting on site or was being sent to a place where they composted it, you could also enter that in here. And for churches who know what their water consumption is, you can also enter that information in here. Now, I know that varies across the country. Some places do get individual water metering and water invoices, and other places don't. So if you don't have that information, don't worry, you won't be able to put that in. But if you do, you can enter that in here. So from those screenshots of what the calculator was looking like, there are a few different types of data sources that need to be gathered. So for things like energy, you would have energy bills, so whether that might be electricity or gas bills that you need to have on hand. For things like expenditure, you need to know your church accounts. For working from home, travel, maybe conversations with staff or volunteers within your team around how people are travelling. Air travel you might already have within your church accounts. For things like food, it's probably going to be a little bit of a survey that you may need to look at. And if you're going to be looking at travel for congregations, you may also want to be doing a travel survey. One of the things, I guess, with the data sources is it's easier if you work together as a team, bring together a small team, and if possible, have someone like your treasurer, your office administrators, people who are in your maintenance team will be really good sources of information for you. If you are looking at pulling together the information for the carbon calculator, you'll need to check with your church leadership around sharing of information and making sure that you can get access to that data. The calculator itself is using emission factors from a variety of New Zealand sources, so mainly the Ministry for the Environment for their voluntary greenhouse gas emission factors. And then for food, it comes from the University of Otago Food Survey, looking at emission factors from different food groups. That was put together a couple of years ago. And ThinkStep Aotearoa New Zealand has used some of Statistics New Zealand's data for industries for looking at the expenditure emission factors. So once you've done all that hard mahi, the footprint can give you a results page, a summary page, and also a downloadable PDF summary report. So the summary page might look a little bit like this. If you've got different emission, if you've been calculating different emission sources, it will show you, color code it for you. So for this church, energy is the dominant emission source. Trying to buy some travel and also a bit of food there as well. If you have entered any information about your church on per person or about your building usage, then those factors will come up. Those metrics will get reported there as well. And then if you wish to have a little bit more of a detailed report that you can download and share with others within your church community, there's a download PDF option. And that comes up with a little bit more information. It will give you your total emissions, the period that you're reporting under. If you have any of those people or building metrics, they'll be reported there as well. And then it will run through for you each of the emission sources broken down by the activities. So you can see, you may not be able to see on this one quite so clearly, but it does break down things like you can do comparisons between for travel, like for car and bus. So for this example, the car emissions were 508 kilograms of CO2 versus the bus, which was close to 300 for the same amount of kilometres travelled. Does the same thing for food and for all the other categories as well. So it gives you a little bit more information that you can then share with your community to tease out perhaps where those big emission sources are for your group and where you might want to be putting some effort into emissions reductions. So that brings us, I guess, to the what next, which is what do you do with this information now that you've gathered all of the data you need for your carbon footprint. The first thing really is to look at talking with your community together around setting some goals and reductions. If we're looking at the 1.5 degree sort of warming, we're looking at least 5 to 6% reductions per year for the next 6 to 8 years. So, if you're looking at maybe perhaps for energy, if you're looking at a goal of 30% by 2030, for example, you might be looking at that kind of reduction. I would suggest starting with areas where changes can be made quickly so people get some initial momentum around where those changes, so it might not be where the biggest impact is, but it can be where changes can be made quickly and people can see and be involved. So that might be around food, for example. Some progress, no matter how small, is key, I think, and if you can work together as a community to see some of that progress that you're making, that can give you the energy to move forward for the next and perhaps more challenging areas to look at. And celebrate your successes and share your stories with each other and with us. We can put those stories on the Eco Church website and share them. It's really good to hear what each other's up to. So some examples could be, this is definitely not an extensive list, but things like in energy, it could be if you know people who could give you an energy audit, that can be a good starting point. Even things like establishing an end of day routine, turning off appliances, lights, putting lights on timers, heaters on timers, that kind of thing can make a difference. For travel, you might look at putting aside Sunday a month or maybe over a church season to focus on low carbon travel options for to and from church, and not just Sundays, but maybe your events during the week as well. And for food, you might look at perhaps encouraging more vegetarian or vegan options at your shared meals. Perhaps you could share and swap recipes. I'm sure the ideas and activities could be endless. And just before we open up for questions, the other element that people do ask me about is the offsetting. And people hear about, should I be offsetting my emissions? I guess we wouldn't be looking at offsetting first, but offsetting is certainly part of it. So first of all, reduce what you can. That's definitely the best thing you can do, is try and reduce your emissions to start with. Offsetting the rest can be helpful, especially to compensate for those emissions where we can't yet avoid them. And Climate Stewards, who have put together this calculator, do have their own offsetting projects in Africa, Asia, and parts of South America. They've got projects around planting trees, having fireless stoves, working with communities on providing water filters and those kind of things. And they do work to make sure that it's not just about carbon mitigation, but also around linking it to wider sustainability development goals. So reducing hunger and having clean access to water and that type of thing. So I will just get myself out of this so I can see any questions people may have. So I'll start from the bottom. How do we access it? Yes, I can put a link in for you to be able to see how to access that. We'll have that on our website as well. How much does it cost? So if you're a member of Eco Church, it's free. The calculator itself actually is free anyway, but if you want access to help with it, be part of the Eco Church network. Can the reporting show comparatives? Doug, did you want to elaborate on that?
Sorry about that. Yeah, probably the accountant in me coming out. You talk about showing how at the end there about making sure that we focus on the celebrate the success and having comparatives of, say, what we were like last quarter and what we've done. You can start showing successes quite quickly if your system can show comparatives.
So at the moment, that is a really good question. At the moment, no, I don't believe it does, like on a quarterly basis, but that is something I could definitely take back to the team there to see if that's something we could.
I mean, if you have a downloadable PDF, it can be done manually, so it's not a big issue, but yeah.
Yeah. Can you enter carbon offsets purchased? At this stage, no, but we can maybe look at whether that's something we can add in. That's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. It's always good to have a group of people together asking these kinds of questions. Can you have multiple congregations and show them separately? Yes. So that is something we can go into in more detail around the setup of this. You can set it up as a group and have the different congregations and different ways of setting up. Cool. Okay, so it is. So how's it been validated? Is against New Zealand standards? Yeah, so it is against New Zealand emission factors, the latest emission factors, and the calculator itself is set up in line with the international greenhouse gas protocol. Yeah, I think there's some good questions here around sort of comparators, how do we know we're doing well, that kind of thing. I think those are really good questions that we might probably do a little bit more work with in conjunction with a number of yourselves who will be using this tool to see how that could work. I think probably this first year we'll be trying to set the baseline, but yes, I think we will need to think about how we can sort of measure that. This is sorry Philip, I'm just looking at your question. It is an annual calculator. You could come in and enter some data monthly. So if you wanted to put in electricity data, for example, you could do that, but it is kind of set up to do it on an annual basis. And so on your question about South Island versus North Island power, unfortunately, no, we don't have it to that level of detail. The emissions factor it's the MFE one, which is kind of it's an average trying to take it across the year, and I don't believe it takes into account regional differences. Richard, your question about do you have evidence that it changes behaviour? Not at this stage. It's very new to us. In the UK, I believe they've got a few churches that have come back to do it 2 or 3 years now. And I can certainly have a chat to Climate Stewards about how that might be changing communities over there. Robin, your question about how many trees to plant to offset emissions. Yes, this is such a great question, and it's a really complex one that Climate Stewards don't want to. They said it's a very tricky one, really, but they are looking at ways that we might be able to at least provide some way of giving you a sense of, how much effort is needed to offset those emissions. Electric buses or petrol buses? Great question, Andrew. At the moment, no, there's not. We did at one stage, there was a more in-depth version of the travel component, but it ended up getting a little bit complicated, I think, at the back end. But we can certainly, that's something we'll certainly still keep in mind, because I think there will be those kind of changes in the future. So, yeah. Right, thank you very much for those questions. I'll have a look through the remaining ones as well while we're in the breakout groups, and just in case I've missed some, which I may well have done. But Iris is shortly going to put us and put you all into breakout groups, and what I'd like us to consider is the question around if there were initiatives or activities you would like to see or to do to help your communities move towards a lower carbon lifestyle. So what kind of initiatives or activities would you like to see happening in your communities? So just have a chance to talk to each other about this. So I hope you all had a chance. I know it wasn't long, but a little bit of a chance to have a bit of a chat with one another. If you would like, I know we're running short on time this evening, but if you would like to pop in the meeting chat any ideas that you came up with, if you just make sure that the message goes to everyone, not just to me, so everyone can see each other's ideas, that would be fantastic. And if there's anyone who wants to elaborate on some of the things they talked about or anything they would like to share, please feel free to. Education, yep, that's great. And to focus on small steps. I think that's really key, isn't it? Start with small steps, just taking a step. Sharing stories, yep, great. Swap the stuff, your allowance, great. Yes, purchasing a bike, love that. Education, yeah. Worm farms, fantastic. Environmental tips in the newsletter. Yep, we've started doing that at our church and it's working really well. It's a great way to get sort of discussion and things started. Fantastic.
Well, some of us have been tasked to do that, but we haven't got around to doing it yet.
Yeah, that's all right. Brilliant. Love the idea. There's always, I know, there is often competing priorities in time, for each of us. So it's also about being gentle on ourselves around how much we can do at a time. I think that whole thing of starting with small steps is a really key point. So,
sorry, just one other thing, Sonia. The one thing that was chatted here about is small steps. It's not about massive lifestyle changes like going vegan or vegetarian. It's cutting your food portions, your meat down from 300, 100 grams to 50 grams and things like that, reducing rather than actually having a massive change.
It's a really good point. That's right. Just reducing, whether it's actually in food or in travel or, looking at reductions. Yeah. Okay, so was a question from David. Where do most churches start, just for building and staff or for congregation wide? I think it will depend on the church and what your where your staff and resources are, but I would probably suggest that you start within your congregation first, and then maybe and just with your building. It could just be with your energy, if that's where you've got your energy, electricity and gas invoices and things. You could just start there. It depends on what resources and data you've got available to you as well. Great, thank you for all those lovely ideas. It's really great. So just to sort of wrap up this evening, I guess it's kind of, you might be thinking about where to from here. We will definitely be providing the information on where you can find and download the calculator or set yourselves up with it. We would really encourage you to work with your churches if you're serious about kind of getting started on the carbon calculator straight away, around sort of working out where you will get that data and things from, and what your boundary and things might be, and then you can look at registering with 360 Carbon and getting yourselves set up from there. I've got about, I think, 5 of the eco churches at the moment who I'll be working with as kind of pilot churches to work through the carbon calculator together, and from that no doubt there'll be learnings for us at A Rocha, and we'll incorporate those into any updates, and we will look at providing further education sessions. They might be online, we might do in-person ones as well, where we can dig a little bit deeper into each of those sections and help you with setting up and registering and setting up your organisation, and if you've got several congregations and all of that kind of thing, we can look at doing that in more depth. So that's kind of, we'll definitely keep you in the loop with where this is going. It's really exciting to see lots of interest in this, and there'll be more information on our Eco Church website as well. We've got a section there for 360 Carbon, and we'll keep updating that with information and frequently asked questions and that kind of thing as well. So keep yourself looking at that. I'm just going to close us with prayer, and then if you need to pop off, that's all fine. If you wish to stay on for some more informal questions or conversation, then we can do that as well. So, Lord, let your love fill our hearts and minds, that we may love the world with the great love that you have for the world, that we may love you with all our heart and mind and soul and strength, and our neighbour as ourselves. Open our eyes to behold your presence. Open our ears to hear your voice. Open our hearts to receive your love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and go well. And if you wish to stay on, you can.